You are now entering the Horror Sanctum.
Hello, and welcome back to the Horror Sanctum Podcast. I'm Jay with John and Kellen. And this week we are joined by horror host, storyteller, and vampire, Count Drahoon. Count, thank you so much for joining us this week.
Thank you so much for having me, fellas. It's a pleasure. And I must say that aside from being told by Godzilla that I am his illegitimate son, the sound of some good old boys with good twangs is a comforting sound.
You'll get plenty of that here.
Great.
Yeah,
I'm in good company.
Yeah. So with all of our guests, we asked you send us a couple of movie options that you want to talk about, you want to watch. And you selected 2023's Suitable Flesh, which, yes, I do own it, John, in case you were wondering. Starring Heather Graham and the incomparable Barbara Crampton, directed by Joe Lynch, and based off of HP Lovecraft's The Thing at the Doorstep, I think. The movie itself is streaming on Shudder, so if you haven't seen it, this episode will contain spoilers, so you're more than welcome to hop over there and come back. But if you're unfamiliar with the film, the plot follows psychiatrist Elizabeth Derby as she becomes obsessed with helping a young patient who's suffering from extreme personality disorder. However, it soon leads her into an occult danger, and she tries to escape from a horrific fate.
Wow, so Suitable Flesh. I don't remember when this exactly came out, but I didn't see it right when it came out. Watched it, I think maybe a month ago, because I know we were going to do the show on it. And it's funny when you make notes on these films, because I'm looking and I updated my notes because I watched it again the other day just to get a little refresher and updated my notes. And I was really harsh on this movie first watch, and then I rewatched it and I kind of noticed a few things about it that made a little more sense. I kind of see what the director was doing. So this film is, I think, obviously an homage to Stuart Gordon, right? Mm-hmm. It's like the director's way of kind of doing a love letter to From Beyond and all that Stuart Gordon stuff. And I originally, when I was writing my review, I noticed that I thought the music was very corny. And now that I heard it again, I'm like, oh no, he's doing Richard Band. Because I'm a big Richard Band fan. I've got a lot of his scores from movies. And I was like, oh, he's just kind of like riffing on Richard Band, like that kind of thing. So that kind of clicked in my head a little more. I was like, oh, I see it was intentional. He wasn't like, yeah, so. And not that, directors usually are with these type of things. It's just, those are the type of things that I will say on rewatch, sometimes you can pick up on that can affect. I know I said I don't like rewatches, but they can be helpful. Yeah, that being said, Barbara Crampton's in this. She's awesome. I know Jay's gonna praise her for sure, but she's one of those actresses that she always got lumped in with sort of the 80s scream queen TNA people. And I didn't really like that because I thought she was better. I always thought she was a really good actress. Like, she's the person in that group. And I'm not picking on anybody in particular, but she's the person that stands out the most in those type of films. And actually, you can tell was a really good actress, and still is today. So it's always cool to see Barbara Crampton. Everyone is good in the movie in their parts. The only part that I really laugh was when I saw Jonathan Sheck, the husband. That guy, there's something so awkward about that guy as an actor. He kind of reminds me of the guy, if you know who Chris Klein is, the guy that was in the Street Fighter movie. He was in American Pie. He's got the terrible Mamma Mia audition. I don't know, there's Chris Klein energy there. Every time I see him, I'm like, oh gosh, here we go. And I don't know what it is. I enjoy watching him, even though I don't personally love his acting. Something about him is funny to me. It's almost like a Gary Busey type thing. So yeah, he's in it, which is funny. I think the biggest thing I didn't like about it was just that, it's kind of like a body horror film. It's a body swap film. And, they have to use sex as the mechanism to swap in the movie, right? The problem is it's just so much. It's I sound like a prude saying this, but it's so much. You get to the point where you're just like, oh, okay, again. Here we go. Like you almost like just 2x because you're like, okay. So that's the only negative I would say about the movie, which I get why they had to do it for the story. I'm not like, I understand it. I was just like, so I feel like they could have figured out a better way of doing that without being super gratuitous with it. But yeah, I mean, a lot of interesting stuff in the movie. I mean, I think it's one of those films that it feels original, even though it's kind of an homage to other things. There's enough originality there that I think it is kind of unique, especially for that type of film now. And what's interesting is there's not a lot of like creature effects and stuff in it, which is I thought was really interesting that he kind of did an homage to Stuart Gordon, but he almost did it in like a David Cronenberg way. It's like he did it a little differently. He didn't focus. I mean, there's violence, but he didn't focus so much into like the monster effects and all, So yeah, I did like it. It was just stuff in it that was kind of like didn't work for me, but overall I did enjoy it. So I'm curious to see what everyone thinks.
So Count, tell us why this was one of your selections.
So story time, real quick, gentlemen. I showed it a second ago, but I have a DVD copy here too. I'm going to lean in just a little bit so you can see. If you will notice, there's some writing on it. This is an autographed DVD copy. I actually met Joe Lynch and Barbara Crampton in person, and they signed my DVD copy. Of course, as you all know, I no longer live in the state of Tennessee. I moved out to Burbank, so there was a DVD signing. This really spoopy shop called Dark Delicacies, and they were pre-selling Blu-ray copies. So if you bought a copy from them directly, you could go in and get yours signed by Joe Lynch and Barbara Crampton. I had a lovely conversation with both of them. Joe Lynch especially, because he was very excited about talking about the little Easter eggs in the movie. So John, when you brought up your point about it being very heavily influenced by Stuart Gordon, I got the sense that he was definitely going for that, mainly because he just wouldn't stop talking about Stuart Gordon, and I mean that affectionately, of course. But he also with him, he had Stuart Gordon's autobiography. He was reading that sort of before the craziness of the signing got started. And he was sort of letting me know about the Easter eggs of the movie, which kind of made me fall in love with the movie a little bit more. Because, John, I kind of felt the same way. I enjoyed it on the first viewing, but I kind of left feeling a little underwhelmed. Because when I saw the trailer, I thought this movie was going to be outrageous, just as outrageous as perhaps Mayhem, which I really loved. It just seemed a little tame to me. But going back in and watching for some of the things that Joe pointed out, like, the exterior of Miskatonic, that's the same exterior from Reanimator, in case you didn't notice. Also, the security guard in the film is the son of the original security guard from the first Reanimator film. So just little things like that made me really appreciate the movie a little bit more. And like you said, John, I also kind of, on the second viewing, when I was actually writing out my notes for the film, there were things that I sort of picked up on that I didn't quite pick up on the first viewing. And it did make me enjoy it a little bit more, but I do have to say overall, I wanted to enjoy it a lot more. I really wish that, you'll pardon the phrase, gentlemen, that Joe went a little bit more balls to the wall, no pun intended. But I felt like it was a bit restrained. And I think a lot of that had to do with the budget. So if you sort of grade on the curve, I think Suitable Flesh is great, but still, I don't know. I just felt like there was just something missing from it. Like there was good body horror, but there wasn't enough. And I felt like the whole the sex, using it to swap this to do the body swap. I don't know. Like, I kind of felt it was a little contrite, and it wasn't as it didn't have that shock factor or that sort of nervous laugh feeling that I was hoping that it was going to be. It was sort of bland, I think.
Yeah, and I'll agree, because it's there. And I mentioned Cronenberg earlier. Cronenberg does something with, sex in his films and a lot of his movies that's it's so unique compared to other movies. And sometimes it is a lot, but I think it's always pretty effective when he does it. There's something about his style doing it. It's very unique. And yeah, I agree. It's also, I guess, not fair that's Cronenberg, right? It's hard to be that, but yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, I was not a big fan of this at all. Not even a little bit. I absolutely hated it, if we're being honest. The whole body swap thing felt overplayed. It didn't feel good in this movie. I mean, you've got The Change Up, A Hot Chick, Freaky Friday, Freaky, which was a great body swap movie. Absolutely loved that one. The acting in this was meh, which I had high hopes for with Heather Graham and Barbara Crampton. They were fine, but it felt like they weren't even into it. Even the scenes where Heather Graham is like really acting, it felt like she was just waiting until the scene was over so she could go cash her check. Judah Lewis, however you say his name, the guy that played Asa, was awful. I was just, his acting was not good. Him trying to be creepy came off more like a regular guy who just happens to be sleazy, and they had him come into this movie. It was like, it was so cringe, and not in a, like, when Hannibal Lecter goes, that's creepy and cringy for the character that he's doing it to. Like, you feel for Clarice, the chill up your back. In this, I was just like, gross, dude. Like, I kept waiting for Chris Hansen to pop around the corner and be like, you mind if you have a seat right here? Everything in this movie felt forced. The dialogue was garbage. Like, I compared this like 30 minutes in, and I was like, am I watching I had to look on the IMDb. Is this a Lifetime movie that they're trying to pass off as something? Because it just felt like a horror version of a Lifetime movie to me. It was the music, the camera work, the little where it was swirling at the end and going in a circle. It felt like somebody probably just like got a pinwheel and glued a camera to it and then just hit their hand to get it to spin, because it was so clunky looking. The cinematography was bland. I guess they went to the school of that movie John made me watch, Things, or whatever that garbage film was. It was like they were like, okay, we could do that, but we have better cameras.
That's I don't know, I'd go that far, man.
That's definitely over the line.
Did it get you in a tailspin?
It got me checking the time on the film multiple times to see how much was left. It was awful. Like I said, everything felt forced. Even her sleeping with the kid, which was obviously gonna happen, especially with the creepy grandpa. The creepy grandpa was way too over the top. And that's my biggest problem with the plot and the way it moved, is everything was so over the top. It didn't feel realistic. It didn't feel like this woman who's happily married, content in her career, would go, and the very second time she meets this kid, she's like, want a bone? I mean, that's basically how she approached it. Like, she didn't even try to push him back. Like, he comes up and she's like, oh no, don't, but I didn't wear panties, so easy entry, let's do this. It was so unbelievable that would even happen at that point. It would have been different to me if the movie had developed that he had already been seeing her. And
well, I'll say this before I forget it. So also in the end, you learn Barb's character cheated as well, and they kept that secret. So if they'd introduced that before, it would have felt less forced. Like if they already had that in our heads that, oh, she did it, she gave us the story how she slept with a patient, now look what's happening here. I think that would have made it feel a little bit easier.
Or they could have just not done that at all. Because what that felt like to me, and I think maybe it was John that touched on this, that all the sex in the movie, it felt like whoever cast Heather Graham, they were hoping they could watch her have sex as many times as possible without like peeping through her bedroom window. And if that's what you want, just go watch Boogie Nights or a couple of other movies where she's been topless and she has no problem being naked. You didn't have to get her on set. So you could be like, hey, I want to watch you have sex with a kid and an old man and your husband and then a kid. Like, it was so hard. This was probably, of all the movies we watched so far, the hardest for me to get through. And that's considering how much I loathe Halloween Ends. That's considering Beyond the Black Rainbow and at least I could watch that and take some stuff away from it, from the way the movie was shot and some of the visuals. This movie was just so bad, and that sucks because this is such a beautiful poster. Like I would love to have that as a poster until I saw the movie, and then I just wanted to buy this so I could set it on fire and then piss on it because that's what it deserves. This movie was that bad, and I'm done.
This is assault. This is straight up assault.
That was rough. My God.
And I asked before if our guest had anything to do with the movie because I was going to rein it way in if it was like, oh yeah, he acted in it or he wrote it. I was going to be like, oh, okay, well.
No, and just so we're clear, I know it seems as if I think it's fair to say that I enjoyed the movie a little bit more. However, it's not a hill I'm ready to die on. So you just, if you feel like you need to just let it all out, you go right ahead. Because I was in that same situation with Night Swim. So I
adore Heather Graham. I mean, she was one of my favorites back when Austin Powers and the Spy Who Shagged Me came out. I was like, oh my gosh, she's top tier for me back in the day. And then I watched this and I was like, poor Heather. Oh, how the mighty have fallen.
Yeah,
how do you follow that?
I used to have a huge crush on Heather Graham back in the late 90s and early 2000s, and I will say it does seem a little sad because this, in terms of the budgets and perhaps the salaries that she used to command in her heyday, I'm sure that this is probably a far cry from what she's accustomed to and what she feels that she's probably worth and is ultimately worth, because I do appreciate her work. I genuinely think she's a great actress.
She's had some great films.
Yes, absolutely, for sure. There is something I wanted to ask you all. I don't know if you picked up on this. I'm not sure if I like it. Well, I like it, but I don't know if this was intentional or not. So I didn't think that him and Crampton's characters were entirely likable. And I really honed in on this on my second viewing. Do you think that Graham, Dr. Derby, do you think that she was a person that was just looking for an out for what she perceived as a mundane life, and she found it in this kid who she, for whatever reason, she's like, hey, this is the guy that I'm going to cheat on my husband with because I'm so bored with my life. And then she just didn't really realize what she was getting herself into. Because it seems to me like she wasn't really sure. She really didn't figure it out until halfway through the movie. Like, oh no, this is supernatural. Like, this isn't some weird mental psychosis that I'm projecting because I feel bad for cheating on my husband. Or do you think that she was just, I'm probably not phrasing it right. Like, I can't tell if like she was somebody that was looking to cheat on her husband, or she was somebody who was really just sort of mesmerized by this whole thing, and she really like given the choice, she really wouldn't have done what she did, but she was literally mesmerized by Asa, and she basically fell into all of this without her willingness to.
I would say that since they developed her character like a Polaroid camera that was taken under the ocean and then set on fire before it had a chance to develop, that's about as much character development they did with her character. They threw her on the screen. They gave you enough to let you know that she's a psychiatrist with a little bit of voiceover that said she had some kind of moral compass, and then she said, oh.
So it was an easy answer for you.
Wow, that's got to be a real man. Has to be.
I don't even know what else to say.
Wow.
I'm flabbergasted. I'm thunderstruck right now.
Vito's gonna love this episode.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Obviously, I have Barb bias. We all know that. I'm wearing a shirt of her now, but I like this movie. I liked it the first time. I was excited to see it. I like Joe Lynch. I love Barb, Heather Graham, man. I could give or take. So when I watched it, I gave it a 4. Kellen's eyes just went very wide. But I'll say the rating from when we go back around, but I gave it a 4. I did bring it down some after watching it again, but I did pick up on some other things too. Heather Graham is probably the most awful therapist there is. Like,
absolutely
terrible. Absolutely terrible. The character development, which if you've listened enough, you know that's something that really bothers me, and there is none here. I love Barb, but the character is not likable. None of them are likable. Who's a likable character in that movie?
All right, so I'm guilty for reading more into it than I should have.
Well, not necessarily. This is what it is. Like, you know, I don't have. I think,
you know who was likable? The security guard that got straight up murdered in the end.
Well,
that guy was likable.
And Joe
awesome.
Lynch,
He was
Joe
great.
Lynch and Jonah Ray as the two workers at the asylum. Like, they were likable enough. Like when she's like, "Well, she's I'll suck your dicks if you let me out." And they just kind of look at each other, you know, like it was subtly like that. That was pretty funny. My biggest takeaway the second time was the transferring back and forth and the logistics of that. So I get the intercourse, and then you switch. Okay, cool. I get it. You took something that was already there and made it a little dirty. Fine. But there's times that they chant, and you know, and they're saying words, and it just like goes into them there. How does that work? Because there's several occasions where there's multiple people in the same area. So how does that incantation go directly into one person and not, how do they control that? That was my biggest question after watching again. I'm like, this part doesn't make sense. The rest of it's perfect. This doesn't make sense to me. Like, how does it not go to the security guard? I have no idea. That was
the guy saying Kali Ma Shakti saying ripping people's hearts out in Indiana Jones made more sense than any part of this movie.
You're such a dick.
Wow.
I love that John picked up on the score and the Richard Band, because it sounded exactly like that. It was just missing wind chimes, because that motherfucker loved his wind chimes. And what it made me think of is it's weird for men. It's going to come off saying weird, like John, you touched on it too, but like all the sex was off-putting, and it really was. It was too much, too quick, out of nowhere. So with that and the music, it kind of reminded me of a Skinamax movie, you know, like all the elements were there, even her voiceover, they just sound like, you know, exactly like a Skinamax we tried to sneak in when
it would have been easier to watch if the screen was scrambled the whole time.
I'm done.
I think you know, you said something interesting. I kept thinking with all of those elements together, like with the gratuitous sex scenes, the score, I didn't pick up on the Richard Band allusions, but I just sort of thought that was sexy jazz music, which I like sexy jazz music personally, so I dug it, as the kids say. But I do wonder, I think it would have worked better if they sort of really leaned more into all of that together and punched up some humor. Like almost made it so melodramatic, like really over the top, like they were, as if they were going for some crazy soap opera, and oh, by the way, this is a Lovecraft story. I wonder if that would have worked better if they were really playing more for laughs than they would have trying to make a straight horror film, because there were where the dialogue was really cringy, and it wasn't intentionally cringy, and that's poor writing. It's bad dialogue. Particularly with I can't pronounce his last name, but Heather Graham's husband in the film. Like I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was just his acting style. I don't know what his dialogue was. I couldn't stand him.
He's just bad
at all.
He's bad.
He was horrible.
Yeah.
Like, and
I've asked him on our show once. He didn't respond.
But he could post fitness videos on Instagram.
He is one of those guys when you see him, like, you don't like him. It doesn't matter what he's in. I've seen him in a few things. I'm like, I don't like him. Like,
Yeah.
and it's weird because it's just something about him that, like, fuck that guy.
Yeah.
Please come on the show though.
I don't remember outside of this movie. I don't really remember anything that he's in. I know that he's Christina Applegate's ex-husband. But other than that, I don't really know what he's been in. But he didn't work in this movie at all. And honestly, just that first big line that he had when he's having dinner with Derby, it's like, well, no wonder why she wants to cheat on him. Like, come on.
Yeah.
I do agree that it felt dialed back by Lynch. If you look at his other films, they're pretty wild and zany for the most part. So it was a little weird that he held back some on this. I don't know what he was going for, but like, I love his work. So
I think if he really tried more to be outrageous and to really just make everything a lot more over the top, I think this movie would have been much better. I don't know if it would have been his best movie, but it definitely would have been better than what we got. That's my biggest takeaway.
yeah, for sure. All right, so let's give our ratings. John.
I think first watch it would have been like a 2.5 out of 5. But kind of rewatching again and looking at some things about it, I did like it more. I did make a note that I didn't bring up. I don't know how this happened. I said that I somehow saw 2 movies within a span of 3 days with Jonathan Sheck having sex in them. I don't know how that's possible. It was like that and that movie, the vampire movie he did. I forget it's an early 2000s vampire movie. It's okay. But that being said, yeah, I think it's good. I have some issues with it with the gratuity, but I'd say 3 out of 5.
Count.
Yeah, overall I enjoyed it. A lot of fun. Still, I felt a little underwhelmed, but I love Joe Lynch. I love Crampton and Heather Graham. It was good to see her star in a film. And I actually went back and read the story that this movie's based off of. Obviously, there was a skeleton. The film was basically a skeleton of the short story. There were actually themes in the short story that I really wish they would have incorporated more in this film. I think it would have made it a bit darker and maybe a little bit more interesting. But overall, I'd say I'm going to cheat a little bit and give it a 2.8 out of 5.
I'm going to round that up a little bit. Kellen,
okay,
bring it down.
Time to ruin the bell curve. I do like the idea of this, if this had been a horror comedy, and I think that's because Freaky did it so well, of being a horror comedy, being darker. I think they didn't really go in any direction. They didn't go dark, they didn't go light, they settled in the middle, and that just absolutely killed it. So obviously for me, a 5. No,
That's
a hard
locked in.
one.
It's too late.
A
All right,
hard
on to the
one.
next, is it? A 1?
A hard one.
1. What did you give Halloween Ends?
I think I gave it a 2.
Interesting. All right, so I gave it a 3.5. Again, Barb bias. I'm not going to apologize. I know she's listening. Love you. That gives us a 2.6. Rounded up. We're going to call it a 3. against Kellen's Damnedest. Suitable Flesh 2023, directed by Joe Lynch. 3 out of 5 knives. 3 out of 5 Heather Grahams. All right, that's going to do it for this episode. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and to wherever you're listening to this podcast now. Follow us over on Instagram. Follow us over on TikTok. Join our group on Facebook. And our new LinkedIn and MySpace pages are currently in the works. Count, thank you so much for taking some time with us. You want to take a second to tell everyone where they can find you and what you do?
Absolutely. And I just want to thank you all for having me on the show. I've been looking forward to this for quite a while. Fan of the podcast. I check you guys out, and I'm really enjoying the content that you guys are creating with the reviews, but also the really stellar interviews you've been having lately. As for me, you can find me on @Count Drahoon. That's Instagram and X. And then, of course, I'm on Facebook, Count Drahoon's Feature of Fright. And you can also check me out on YouTube. That's where I'm doing a lot of my content here lately. That's Count Drahoon Presents. I do movie reviews as well, but I also do sketches, and you can also see some of my old radio shows too.
Awesome. All right, so go check that out. Give him a like, give him a follow, subscribe, and all that fun stuff. All right, that's going to be it for this episode. I'm Jay with John, Kellen, Count Drahoon, and until next time,
keep it spooky.
Keep it spooky.
It's spooky.
John won. Ding, 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 ding.
It was like that's how the nose going.
We just need to do an edit where TJ's head just pops out from a keep it spooky, and then he rises back up.
It'll be interesting to see TJ's take on this, considering he didn't get a chance to hear my beautiful, eloquent speech on the merits of this film.
Hey, TJ here. Sorry I wasn't able to be present for the actual recording of the show. I had a prior engagement before that show was even planned for. But I'll keep my thoughts, since Kellen asked, I'll keep my thoughts short and sweet. I like to, I keep wanting to call it sustainable flesh, like it's some sort of government program or something. Suitable flesh. Suitable flesh, I liked. Just a little above average. I give it a 3 out of 5. I was debating 3 or 3.5 out of 5. It's certainly not a tier above that for me, but I think it's slightly more the middle of the road. I like the HP Lovecraft influence. I like it was heavily an homage to Stuart Gordon's HP Lovecraft films, and I do like Barbara Crampton and Heather Graham, although I do think they are better in other films. Some of that's the writing. Dialogue's not great. Some of the plot mechanisms are a little clunky, and it's a lot of the stuff that's already been talked about this show. I think using the intercourse as a mechanism for the body swapping is a little bit interesting, but they do it too much. And they kind of veer on the not being gratuitous kind of vibe. So there's not really anything that you're showing for the most part. So having to see it over and over again, kind of, what's the point? It's kind of like what John says. Well, may as well just fast forward through, especially after you've seen it once. But at the same time, having that as they kind of paint themselves in a corner with that as a mechanism for doing the main thing that happens to be the plot device that totally controls the action in the film and sets all the characters in the plot forward. So I think that was a misstep. I think because they also had the thing where you could just recite the stuff from the Necronomicon and do the body swap without that anyway. So it didn't make a whole lot of sense. I think that was a misstep. And since it was a central crux of the whole plot, I think some of the stickiness comes from that. Also, not we spent hardly any time with the characters enough to have any sense of Heather Graham's character, who we witness the entire film through. So, really, any sympathy we have for her is just off of her as a person and an actress and the work she's done in other films, because it's not here in this script, unfortunately. Having said that, though, it's a fun watch. I liked that it was a unique take on HP Lovecraft and the whole body swapping thing with a horror lens that you don't get a lot in. I think Kellen mentioned that Freaky did it much better, which is true. Freaky is one of the better kind of quirky, high concept horror slash dark comedies to kind of come around in the last probably decade. So that's a hard, and with a much bigger budget, Blumhouse, some great actors like Vince Vaughn. I mean, it's comparing apples and oranges. It's a different tier. It's a different ball game that you're playing when you're working at that level versus, I didn't look up the budget, but I'm sure this wasn't more than a $500,000 to $1 million movie. If it was 2 million, I would be surprised. But even at that level, I mean, you're playing at the budget level of, you're in that micro budget world, and you have to play to what you got and work to your constraints. And some of those decisions work, some of them don't. For me, it's a 3 out of 5, which would be a 6 out of 10. And that was consistent enough to where it's not going to change the rating. So the rating for us is 3 out of 5. Back to you guys.
I wonder if he listens. I don't listen to these very often, our own podcast. I know that's terrible, but
I go back on Facebook every now and then just to kind of see where we're at and kind of see how the flow went. But I mean, we're part of it, so it's kind of like some actors watching their own movies.
Yeah.
Making the reels technically makes me watch them again anyway. So,
well, yeah, and if you're editing, I mean, some of your episodes get up to over an hour. That's a lot to edit. So it can be really tedious having to go back through and rewatch something you recorded over and over and over again.
Yeah, I used to do that with our Weirdos podcast, and it was a lot of work because we didn't shoot like this where all the cameras were on screen. We recorded with our own phones, and so I had to take all those and upload, and then I had to cut and match the audio, and it was a lot of work. So a 45-minute episode took me about 2.5 hours to edit together.
Allegedly.
What's the cup you got there, Jay? What's that cup you're drinking out of?
It's a Spider-Man.
Oh, sweet.
Oh.
Wow.
Andrew Garfield Spider-Man.
Wow.
Nice.
Oh yeah,
Underrated.
They need to give him his third film.
He's really good.
He deserves the third one. And his moment in the last Spider-Man, No Way Home, that moment with
Emma Stone
when he catches Mary Jane.
Oh yeah.
That is such a well acted scene. Like that, you want to talk about somebody who can convey emotions perfectly with just their face. God, he killed it. He killed it.
The Spider-Man 2 movie, the amazing one, the second one with Electro.
Yeah,
it's like
ruined.
Yeah, there's parts of that movie that I really like and I think are like really great, and then there's other parts where are just so bad. That's one of those movies that's like, it's weird to watch it because you're just like, at one moment you're like, oh, this is terrific, and then like 10 minutes later you're like, well, that's horrible. So
the kid that played that was going to play the Green Goblin in that, I love that dude. I can't think of his name, but I've never seen him in anything I didn't like. I was excited to see where that character was going to go.
Yeah, and it was interesting. It was interesting. They were more in the comics. When Gwen Stacy falls, it's left to the reader as to whether or not it was Spider-Man's fault, whether or not she was already dead before her neck snapped. It was supposed to be left more ambiguous so that he was wrestling with whether or not he could have done anything different. And then this one, it's like, oh no, she dead. Her head snapped back and crushed on the concrete. So yeah, you failed. There's no ambiguity. You failed, Spider-Man.
Way to bring it down. You've inherited Grumpy John. We got Grumpy Kellen in the house.
At least I
We
smile.
swapped.
Tramp, you
I was-
swapped. Wait a minute. How did you swap?
Oh, whoa, whoa. We just walked into that one. We walked into it.
Is that how it happened?
I
Tripped and
didn't hear
fell on
any
it.
incantations.
Oh, God.
All right, guys.
You
I'm
tore
out of
that
here.
mo-
What?
Sorry, Jay. I was
No,
just
go
going to say you tore that movie apart, but you did it with such gusto and positivity. So
Our buddy Vito calls him the smiling face assassin.